Getsuga, and today I'll be doing another Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video today. And today I'll be talking about P.U.N.K.s as well as Beetroopers. P.U.N.K.s are, I forgot the name of this set because of course I do. It was a deck building set which premiered Exorcisters, P.U.N.K.s, as well as, what was that other one? Wow, forgot about that already. Oh, right, the Brave Token archetype. And basically this archetype is, I don't want to say it's synchro or fusion based because they're very linear, because they only summon one fusion and they only summon one synchro, or at least one type of synchro, and that being level 11 synchros. And that pool is not that big. But anyways, let's get started. For the pros, this deck has great monsters. Most of their monsters aren't bad. Even their main deck monsters are pretty, they range from good to great. This deck has good spells and traps. As much as people want to shit on the spell cards do come in handy from time to time, and they're pretty decent. One basically punishes your opponent for targeting cards you control, which isn't gonna happen consistently, but it's like, if you're facing off against a deck that likes to do that, you can easily search that card out, activate it, and punish your opponent for even attempting to target your cards. And one of them basically turns all your monsters into catasters, which is pretty nice. Especially since a lot of your main deck P.U.N.K. monsters have very low attack. This deck has generic psychic support because Research Lab, amazing. Emergency Teleport, which recently went to 2, also amazing. And I honestly hope Emergency Teleport goes to 3, but at the same time, another part of me wishes it stays at 2, to be completely honest. Because Emergency Teleport it's really powerful, ridiculously powerful, in fact. Next, this deck has decent recovery because a lot of their monsters searched. This deck has 3 searchers. Yeah, they search for specific, they search for trap, spell, monster, but those can all add up, especially since it's not that hard to swarm in this deck, which I forgot to put. This deck can swarm fairly easily, which basically allows you to just put a lot of monsters on board, and since a lot of your monsters actually bring forth value, you can essentially snowball advantage fairly easily. And you can essentially go +3 or +2, especially going first or second. And another thing I realized, Mystic Mind works really well in this deck. I mean, granted, Mystic Mind works well in a lot of decks, to be completely honest. And yeah, this deck is also really consistent because, like I mentioned, a lot of their monsters searchable. They're searchers. Hell, actually, I think most of their main deck monsters are searchers. You have the 3 that essentially search your monsters, spells, and traps, and then you have one that searches your another one that searches your monsters through a discard, and numeral ogre, and you have another one that basically special summons a P.U.N.K. from your deck for a steep cost, but that cost generally doesn't matter because this deck can essentially make it up pretty quickly. Yeah, you basically just special summon any P.U.N.K. from your deck to essentially search whatever you want. So it not only helps swarm, but it also allows you to get whatever P.U.N.K. you want on the field so you can search whatever cards you want later. This deck can swarm because with Research Lab and E-Tele, you can essentially get more of your P.U.N.K.s onto the field. And on top of that, you also have your main deck, the original main deck, level 8 P.U.N.K. that basically allows you to special summon a P.U.N.K. monster from your deck. So that's also pretty nice. Also, this deck can set up several negations because one of your main deck P.U.N.K. monsters basically allows you to either synchro summon or fusion summon on your opponent's turn, and Amazing Dragon, once synchro summon, basically allows you to bounce cards. So that's also pretty nice. Also, you have your trap cards, which again are searchable. You have your spell cards, which can interrupt because again, one punishes your opponent for targeting your P.U.N.K. cards. And one basically makes all your monsters a catastrophe, so your opponent has to get rid of them if they want to continue to hurt you. And your trap cards also provide more interruption because one basically is spot removal and another is monster negation that also allows you to gain life points, making it hard for your opponent to actually KO you. So, yeah, I would still say it's a tier 2.5 for defense. Anyways, and for the cons, this deck lacks versatility among synchros. Anyways, this deck lacks versatility among synchros because, like I mentioned, this deck mostly just goes into level 11 synchro monsters. This deck does, like, your main deck non-tuners are level 8, and all your tuners are level 3, and most of your deck are made of level 3 tuners. So there's that. And this deck can't... Oh yeah, also they don't really fusion summon anything outside of P.U.N.K. monsters, and you only have one P.U.N.K. fusion. So there's that. For the second con is this deck can't really play through more than 2 to 3 interruptions. Or I should say... Or I guess I should specify going second. But that's what Mystic Lion is for, or your Dark Ruler no more. So there's also that. Also, Triple Tactics Talent. It's also a decent card you can run in this. And basically in most decks, to be completely honest. So for power, I give this deck a 3 out of 5 because this deck can OTK under the right circumstances. As well as deliver tons of damage. And if you read Amazing Dragon, this not only does it provide disruption, it can also special summon a P.U.N.K. monster from your graveyard. So you could basically just summon back your fusion monster, use your fusion monster's effect to summon 2 P.U.N.Ks from the deck. And then you could also just go off from there and continue to swarm the field, mostly with more Amazing Dragon. And then also, if you do decide to summon another Amazing Dragon, you could essentially bounce your opponent's board and continue to go in for more damage. So there's also that. For defense, this deck has a lot of interruptions, so of course interruptions do count for defense. So I'd say it's a 3.5 out of 5. Not sure why I put 2.5 out of 5 before, but yeah, you basically have your spell card that makes your monsters catastrophes. You have that spell card that punishes your opponent for targeting monsters with card effects. As well as, like, when they're destroyed by your opponent's card effects, you can essentially, like, prevent, I think, battle or battle damage. And you also have your disruptive trap cards to work with, so there's also that, as well as the interruption with the Amazing Dragon combo. I put combo in quotes, so there's also that. And for recovery, a 3 out of 5, because everything in this deck searches. Almost everything in this deck searches, and you also got your E-Tally and your double summon because of your research lab. So those things are pretty nice to have. For versatility, I give this deck a 2.5 out of 5 because the spells and traps do provide you with multiple means of getting over your opponent's cards and your opponent's boards. This deck, like I mentioned, you don't really have your synchro pool is very small. Your fusion pool is non-existent. And yeah, and your spells and traps, yeah, they are very useful, but like one's just typical monster negation. Two of them basically allows you to pop cards your opponent controls. Actually, three of them does, because the one that punishes your opponent for targeting cards with card effects, it essentially just allows you to target a card they control and pop it. So, and I guess Amazing Dragon allows you to bounce, but I don't think you'd count that, especially since that's like one of the only things it can do, and it's one of the only monsters you can go into in this deck, due to the deck being designed to go into level 11 synchro monsters. And like I mentioned, that pool isn't very big. And for consistency, I'd give this deck a 4 out of 5 because you rarely brick with this deck, since you have your E-Tellies, you have your many punk monsters that search, you have your many punk monsters that special summon directly from the deck, or allow you to search your punk monsters that allow you to search more punk cards. So it's fairly hard to brick with this deck. It's still possible, but it's very hard to do so. And you can essentially set up boards pretty consistently on your first turn. So I'd argue that this deck is either tier 2 or tier 2.5. I guess thinking about it is like tier 2.5. Because this deck is pretty powerful and they don't have that many cons, especially for a deck that just premiered. Yeah, they're basically just a decent deck, but I'd say they're pretty powerful, especially if you've seen what I've done to Florundery. Oh my gosh, I can't even pronounce that. Essentially, what I did to that bird deck with this deck, you could argue that punks are pretty powerful, and people were pretty wrong for underestimating them when they were first revealed. Next off, I'm going to be doing Beetroopers. And Beetrooper are our most recent TCG exclusive archetype, and they're insect based. They're an insect link deck. So let's get started. This deck has great boss monsters, with the exception of the fusion monster, which is pretty ass, and it's such a crime and an insult that thing requires 4 insect monsters. Like, it should at most require 3 insect monsters. Come on, Konami, what were you thinking? Because like a lot of your boss monsters are like your Neptune, which basically allows you to recycle your banished insects. You have your Invincible Atlas, which allows you to special summon even more Beetroopers from your deck, and one that also allows you to disrupt your opponent's graveyard as well as search your Beetrooper spells and traps. The second pro is that this deck has a lot of great spells and traps. Before they only had Formation as well as Sting and Fly to work with, but now they have like another token generator. I mean, because Formation is just a slow token generator, but now they have a more consistent token generator in the form of one of their spells and then one of their traps. The spell one being better, especially since the spell one also functions as spell and trap removal, which is pretty nice. Because I feel like people should run that more and more, especially with decks like Mystic Mine running around, as well as like other trap heavy decks running around. So there's that. And also they have, like, I forgot what other card, what other spell and trap they got. Oh yeah, they have the fusion spell, which also sucks because it doesn't make summoning the fusion monster that much easier. It's basically just polymerization. It's essentially what that is. It's polymerization that can basically add itself back to your hand under the right circumstances. This deck has a lot of decent insect support to work with, most notably Resonant Insect. Resonant Insect basically just makes and breaks this deck. This deck can still function without it, but Resonance Insect is the best card in this whole archetype. Because once you link off with Resonance Insect, you can essentially pop off. This deck can easily OTK. Because, like, you just summon your Invincible Atlas, you can basically summon multiple Invincible Atlas, as well as a Doom Dozer, as well as, like, your Sting Lancer. And in case you feel like being even more ballsy, you can summon more monsters, because this deck does swarming really well. This deck can set up boards, because this deck also works really well with Battle Wasp, but knowing me, I'm not gonna mix those two decks together because I don't like the mixing of decks. But when you mix the two decks together, this deck can actually set up pretty gnarly boards, because you can get Appaloosas onto the field. You can have a Sting Lancer in your hand to disrupt your opponent if they feel like doing graveyard plays. You can also summon your Sting to Poison. Your Battle Wasp Sting to Poison, which also has the effect of triggering another insect monster to essentially target a monster your opponent controls to negate. As well as you can use your counter trap, your Beetrooper counter trap Sting and Fly to negate monster effects your opponent might have, as well as other type of interruptions. So there's that. This thing can also swarm like crazy, under the right circumstances. Sometimes you can brick with this deck. I've bricked quite a bit with this deck. But when you don't brick, this deck can actually go off like crazy and swarm the field, and also to perform pretty quick and powerful OTKs. And this deck is fairly consistent, because you have a lot of ways to get your Resonance Insect, and even then, it's not that much of a problem, to be completely honest. And for the cons, this deck lacks inherent monster removal. This deck doesn't have many pop effects or any spin or bounce effects. They just like to summon big, beefy insect monsters and basically beat over your opponent. And even then, they generally can't get over most of your opponent's monsters, because if they have a monster that has more than 3,000 attack, which is very likely in today's game, you're kind of out of luck unless you get Invincible Atlas and just turn off his protection by tributing to gain attack, but chances are you're not going to be doing that, or chances are that's going to be incredibly risky to do, so there's also that. And this deck generally can't play through more than 2 interruptions, generally speaking, because one thing I noticed about this deck is they have very if you interrupt them at certain points, they kind of just fall apart. My opponent just stopped me from abusing Resonance Insect mid combo, and I'm kind of just forced to end the turn on a very lackluster board, or I'm forced to actually fall short of OTKing my opponent. And then my opponent then starts their turn and then proceeds to body me into the dirt. So there's also that. So for power, I'd give this deck a 4 out of 5. Like I mentioned, this deck can OTK like no one's business. I guess I shouldn't say that, because there's tons of other decks that can OTK even crazier, but this deck is very consistent at doing so. So there's that. For defense, I'd give this deck a 3 out of 5, because Field Spell also provides a little bit of defense, as well as your disruptions. Your disruptions can also work very well to protect your life points, like your counter trap. Yeah, you have to control. Oh yeah, and the counter trap also recycles itself if you control a Beetrooper with 3,000 or more attack. But you have your counter trap, you have your field spell that basically allows you to float into a token to minimize damage. But at the same time, the field spell also makes you lose life points if you use its first effect. So that's something. as well as like the new Beetrooper trap, which basically allows you to tribute a Beetrooper and special summon tokens depending on how much attack the attributed monster has. But that card isn't that great. It's probably a decent one of. So you could also use that as protection, as well as like setups for your next turn, essentially. For recovery, I'd give this deck 2.5 out of 5 because your Beetrooper formation is pretty good. And if you manage to summon Sting Lancer, which is pretty easy because Sting Lancer has a fairly easy summoning condition. Like if you summon Sting Lancer, you're essentially getting back into the duel. Granted, it's not too easy to summon Sting Lancer because if your opponent knows you have Sting Lancer or finds a way to either stop your Sting Lancer's search or its summon, you're essentially entering an uphill battle. And okay, for versatility, I'd give this deck a 3 out of 5 because they have a lot of insect stuff to work with. So you can build many different builds using using these cards, but like I mentioned, they don't have inherent monster removal, so what they can do and can get away with as far as versatility goes is very slim. Arguably, I should give this a 2.5 out of 5, but like I mentioned, there's many variants you can go with. Clearly not as many variants as COVID, but we're not going to talk about that. But overall, this deck still lacks the ability to do a lot of things. They're basically just consistent in making boards, and that's just about it. And this deck I'd give this deck a 3 out of 5 as far as consistency, because this deck can consistently make boards and consistently OTK. The only problem is, like, when interrupted, they just fall apart, like I mentioned, and it makes it very hard to actually close out games as soon as possible. So, because of all that, I'd give this deck a 2.5 out of 5. I might be wrong because this deck is really powerful, but I'm not sure how it stands against the top decks. I'm not sure how it stands against the top decks of this format. Oh yeah, also I forgot to mention, Contacting Sea is really good in this deck. Hell, it's a main deck option in this deck because you can easily search it off of your Resonance Insect, and if your opponent tries to do something funny, you can essentially lock them out of comboing with your Contacting Sea. But anyways, that's all I have to say about Beetroopers and Punks. Anyways, tell me what you guys think about these two decks in the comment section below, and it's been me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'm out.